Did you know that Albania has racing drivers? I didn't, but that's the point of this new video series, where I'll discuss the racing drivers and rally drivers from each country that has them in alphabetical order. For countries like Finland, Germany and the United Kingdom, I'll have heaps of possible content because of course, they have a lot of drivers. But the alphabet starts with Afghanistan, which I couldn't find anything for, unsurprisingly, and then that's followed by Albania. Now, Albania is the butt of many a joke, but I actually find it's quite unfair, all the jokes about Albania. Albania is a mighty fine country, and they're not as underdeveloped as you might think. In fact, Albania even has a train. And if their economy keeps growing at the current rate it's growing at, they might even be able to afford a second one. Also, the Albanian tech sector is going very strong too. I mean, look at this article from the New York Times. Despised dictator's scary shrine becomes a bet on Albania's future. And that wouldn't be the only time that Albania bet its future on a pyramid either. But if they really want to make Tirana truly become the Tel Aviv of the Balkans, they'll have to start... never mind, that is... But they do actually have some racing drivers, and I will talk about them, but these drivers are quite obscure, so why are racing drivers from Albania so rare? I mean, other formerly communist countries with even smaller populations have heaps of drivers. You've got Estonia with Oit Tanak, you've got Czechia with Jan Kopecky. These are just drivers I've thought of off the top of my head because I'm talking off script right now. But why are there almost no Albanian racing drivers, even at the lower levels? Well, the reason is because Albania is different case to other former communist countries. You see, Albania's leader was especially psychopathic. His name was Enver Hoxha, and what he set up was a brutal dictatorship comparable to North Korea today. So, if you want to know why there's no North Korean racing drivers, it's very much for the same reason. And Albania was way more restrictive than even the Soviet Union under Stalin. Hoxha's regime was so extreme that even their communist neighbours didn't like Albania under Hoxha. Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union were seen as enemies of Albania just as much as NATO and the West. It's this ultra-high control dictatorship which is why we very rarely see racing drivers' names besides the Albanian flag, because when the dictatorship fell, well, they might not be a high control dictatorship like they were before the 90s, but it leaves a legacy. And basically, because under Albanian law at the time, when it was a dictatorship, ownership of personal vehicles was illegal. And that meant that for many Albanians, the only car that they had seen was the Mercedes 600 Pullman that Enver Hoxha would travel in. And to make matters worse, Hoxha's regime deliberately did not educate the population, as an uneducated population is less likely to resist. But this meant that the country had a much harder time recovering from communism than other Eastern countries once democracy did come to Albania. Once the people were allowed to own cars, many Albanians would buy a used Mercedes from a Western country, as Mercedes was pretty much the only car manufacturer with brand recognition in Albania, due to Enver Hoxha's 600 Pullman. But big Mercs, they're not exactly enthusiast cars, famous for spirited driving. They're big, soft, comfortable things. Like driving a sofa around, really. Once the country got democracy, the people were also more interested in important things like building actual schools and basically building a country from scratch because of how underdeveloped Hoxha left the country, so building racetracks wasn't exactly their number one priority. And I've got to say, they have made a fairly impressive bit of progress, and that's not a joke. Like, they have, compared to what they were, that they have actually made some proper progress. But out of all of this, the country has still produced some racing drivers. And I do apologise for partaking in the Australian tradition of mispronouncing racing driver names. If you've ever watched V8 Supercars, when Kevin Estra came here, the commentators kept insisting that his actual name was Estray. For some reason, I have no idea why, because that's not how you'd pronounce it, even in English. But anyway, Albanian is quite an obscure language, and it's not related to any other language either, so it is hard to work out how to actually pronounce these names. So what I did was I thought, right, I can't think of any famous racing driver from Albania, but there'll be someone who's in some clubman championship, right? So I looked at driverdb.com, and you can only see 2 drivers listed under the Albanian flag. Now these aren't the only Albanians who've sat behind the wheel of a race car, but I'll get onto that. The 2 drivers are Alexander Ndiro and Diyar Islami. Alexander Ndiro entered the 2011 FIA Karting Academy trophy, but there's no information besides that, and the fact that one of his competitors was named Jackie Chan. Diyar Islami, on the other hand, was entered in the 2024 Swiss Karting Championship, taking 5th place, and the WSK Champions Cup with 27th. But that's all the info we have. But fear not, because the search is not over. I also had a look at EWRCresults.com, one of my favourite info sources, and I found a rally held in Albania, started in 2025. Specifically, it's called Rally Albania, and it's a rally raid event, and plenty of Albanians entered in the cars class of the rally, although the SSV category was entirely foreign drivers. The winner of the rally in the cars class was Lavian Nurka. In fact, Albanians locked out the podium. Unfortunately, when I clicked on the drivers' names, this seemed to be the only event they'd entered that was recorded on EWRC. And that means it's probably their only events ever, because EWRC records all sorts of events. It doesn't matter how local or obscure. This site has clubman rallies from the 1930s listed. It's extensive. Maybe Albania has a really obscure rally that didn't make it to EWRC, but from what I can see, that's all I can see from these drivers. But fear not, because I then decided to try my luck by asking the Albania subreddit if they knew of any Albanian racing or rally drivers, and I got some interesting answers. One said Gazbardi, who seems to be a politician and not a racing driver, but I don't know, maybe he did some amateur stuff, but it doesn't appear anywhere. Spetim Rota was another answer I got, which when searched up shows an Instagram post about a rental scooter and translates to rescue wheels. And finally, Desara Mariki, who is a real person and did compete in a real motorsport, and is even famous enough to have a Wikipedia page, but the page is one paragraph and the sources are in either Albanian or Italian. And I don't like to be one of those YouTubers who just paraphrases Wikipedia, but it does seem like Wikipedia is the best English source for Desara Mariki. But she did finish in 6th place in the Eco Rally of San Marino in 2011, and this was a round of the FIA Alternative Energies Cup. So what exactly is that? Well, here's some footage of the 2012 FIA Alternative Energies Cup from the 2012 World Champions. What the hell was that? They're just driving around on the road. That must be the most boring 10 seconds of my life. The FIA might call it the Alternative Energies Cup. I call it a grocery run. That's not a real motorsport. Okay. Surely there's gotta be at least one Albanian racing driver who actually competes in a real series, right? Well, what about if I include racing drivers of Albanian descent competing under different flags? Well, now we can get the ball rolling, because finally, I've found one. And you might have even heard of this guy. His name is Larim Zendeli and competes under a German flag, but he is a descendant of Albanians, and he even won a championship in 2018 with the ADAC Formula 4 series, which is Germany's national Formula 4 championship. He then went on to compete in Formula 2, where he reached the lofty heights of 17th place. That's better than 18th. Since his days of Formula 2, he's moved on to Porsche Cup racing in various national championships, finishing around the middle of the field. Now, he's not F1 material, obviously, but to be honest, a lot of people don't realise just how good of a driver you have to be to even achieve this in motorsport. I mean, an ADAC F4 title is an ADAC F4 title, and that field had Liam Lawson, Frederick Vesti, Charles Wirtz, Jack Doohan, and Gregoire Saucy. So it's not like a bunch of nobodies either. But the future may change for Albania, as they are currently building an FIA Grade 2 track called Auto Motor Park Albania, and this will produce some Albanian racing drivers, especially since it'll have a kart track. And the Albanian government also seems to believe that they could host an F1 race by 2030. I think this is highly unrealistic since the track is an FIA Grade 2 track set to be complete by the end of this year, so they'd finish the track and then immediately have to close it to upgrade to FIA Grade 1, and that just sounds like a big waste of money. Why not just build it Grade 1 in the first place if you're actually planning on holding a racetrack? But I guess it is a good bit of publicity for the track to act like it'll host F1. And I do like the track logo though. It's very reminiscent to the old F1 logo, which is better than the current F1 logo. But at the moment, it is very hard to find any Albanians in motorsport. But I reckon in 15 years or so, there'll be at least a handful.